By the next morning, as he took in the desperate situation in the shelter, he decided to get a grip over himself. So by the next morning, after looking at the pitiful, desperate situation of everybody in the Red Cross shelter, he decided to get a grip, control over himself. He thought, he sensed a deathly grief settling upon, please underline, the 2,500 strong crowd in the shelter. So he thought, I must control myself. I must help in mobilizing everyone. Everybody was depressed and distressed. 86 lives were lost in the village, 86. All the 96 houses had been washed away. So in his village in Kalikura, there were 96 houses. All the houses were washed away. It was their 4th day at the shelter. So far they had survived on green coconuts, but there were too few to go around such a tumult. Tumult means such bulk of people, so many people. So 96 houses washed away, 86 lives were reportedly lost, and 2,500 in the shelter with no food, no amenities, nothing. Everybody seemed distressed and sad. Prashant, all of 19 years. So you see, he's just a little boy, not little, a young man, decided to step in as leader of his village. If no one else did, he organized a group of youths and elders to jointly pressurize the merchant once again to part with his rice. This time the delegation succeeded and returned triumphantly. Triumphantly means victoriously. Delegation means the committee, the group of people who approached for something. Wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. So you see, Prashant was barely 19 years old, but he felt that the youth should help in mobilizing everything, people, and helping them. So they spoke to the merchant. No one cared that the rice was already rotting. They spoke to the merchant, and situations were fine. Branches from fallen trees were gathered to light a reluctant and slow fire on which to cook the rice. For the first time in 4 days, the survivors at the cyclone shelter were able to fill their bellies. His next task, for the first time in 4 days, they had survived on coconuts, but after appealing to the merchant, he finally parted with his, heap of rice. And after 4 days, they took rotten rice to fill up their bellies. His next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth, urine, vomit, and floating carcasses. Filth, urine, vomit, floating carcasses, and to tend to the wounds and fractures of the many who had been injured and saved. So you see, next he arranged to organize a team of youth, because youth can only come forward and help to clean the mess and to help the wounded people. On the 5th day, a military helicopter flew over the shelter and dropped some food parcels. It then did not return. Youth task force that Prashant had organized gathered utensils from the shelter, from the rummages of the shelter. Then they deputed the children. Please see how to attract the attention of the helicopters that people here are hungry and need help. To lie on the sand left by the waters around the shelter with these utensils on their stomachs. To communicate to the passing helicopters that they were hungry. The message got through, and after that the helicopter made regular rounds of the shelter, airdropping food and other basic needs. So the plan worked. They used their brain. They gave a signal to the flying helicopters that people in this shelter are hungry. And finally this worked. They could communicate, and finally helicopter made regular rounds of the shelter. Prashant found that a large number of children had been orphaned. He brought them together and put up a polythene sheet shelter for them. So this is very important. He not only organized youth group, but he helped the children and women. Women were mobilized, children and women were getting depressed, mobilized to look after them, while the men secured food and materials for the shelter. So the children and women were given safety and work, while the men arranged for food and shelter. As the weeks passed, Prashant was quick to recognize that the women and children were sinking in deep concern and grief because they had nothing to do, and some of them lost their dear members, some became orphans, some became, widow. So everywhere some became childless. He persuaded the women to start working in the Food for Work program started by an NGO. So he convinced the women to take part in Food for Work program, in societal help, and for the children he organized sports events. He himself loved to play cricket, and so he organized cricket matches for children. He started to involve women children into activities so that they do not get depressed and full of grief. Prashant engaged with other volunteers in helping the widows and children to pick up the broken pieces of their lives, the initial government plan. So you see, he also convinced the widows and the children to live a life. Everything had not ended just because of this calamity. Widows have lost children, so they could adopt orphans. Children have lost mothers, they could get the love of the widows and the childless mothers. The initial government plan was to set up institutions for orphans and widows. However, this step was successfully resisted, as it was felt that in such institutions children would grow up without love. So in institutions they will every time be conscious about the fact that we are orphans, we are widows, we are childless mothers and fathers. So instead of making them remember about their loneliness and to suffer under that stigma, Prashant's group believed that orphans should be resettled in their own community itself. Orphans can be adopted by childless parents. Childless parents in this process will also get children. And women should be, engaging themselves in activities and make a family once again. Possibly new foster families. Orphans should be resettled, made up of childless widows and children without adult care. So Prashant's group believed that orphans should be resettled in their own community in new foster families made up of childless widows and children without adult care. It is 6 months after the devastation of the super cyclone. This time, Prashant's wounded spirit has healed simply because he had no time to bother about his own pain. His handsome, youthful face is what the widows and orphan children of his village seek out most in their darkest hour of grief. So you see, Prashant had overcome the pain that he had got from this incident. Why? Because he did not have time to look in his own pain, because he was so very involved in the welfare of other people. His handsome youthful face is what many people seek out to in their hour of pain and grief, and that is a gift. That is a blessing for Prashant to remain engaged in activities so that he could give more and more to the people who need. So you see, it is written by Harsh Mandar. So you see, the main thing is that when such natural calamity occurs, we must remain united and start helping each other. And the youth should play a major role, in organizing everything. And we should always think about organizing ourselves and start a new life once again, because life must move on its natural course. Thank you, everyone. Read your text thoroughly. Bye-bye.